Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, and a big thank you to wherever you are in the world right now for joining us on our third ransomware talk show. Now, on our first two episodes, we talked a lot about fortifying ransomware game plans, and we looked at government enforcement insights and regulations as well. So today, it is all about zero trust principles as the game winning goal. My name is Barbara Latimer, and it's my pleasure to be your host for today. Now, the way we work has changed, with workloads shifting to the cloud and being accessed via countless endpoint devices. The attack surfaces for bad actors to act on are larger than ever. Will security systems, or more importantly, legacy security systems, be enough to defend against threats in real time? How can organizations eliminate blind trust across users, devices, and networks? And what can they do to stay cyber resilient? Now, the hint lies in adopting a when, not if approach, which is an integral philosophy in zero trust. But before we dive into how organizations can change the game with zero trust, let's meet our experts. Joining us first today is Sid Deshpande, Director of Palo Alto Networks, who spearheads cybersecurity transformations across Asia Pacific and Japan with 19 years of expertise. His team designs cutting-edge security architectures to enhance regional cyber resilience. Also joining us today is Lee Swift, Chief Information Security Officer at Catholic Education Western Australia. Now, C leads cybersecurity efforts to protect 163 schools and fosters a robust cyber culture, ensuring a secure digital environment for students and staff. Now, last but not least, we have Neil Hammett, Security Principal Consultant at Veeam for APJ, who drives strategic security solutions to bolster organizational defenses. His expertise strengthens cybersecurity frameworks across the Asia Pacific and Japan region. Now, we do have a Q&A session all the way at the end of today's session. So if you've got any questions, either specifically for speakers or generically, pop them into the question box and we will answer as many as we possibly can. So we're going to get straight into it. Now, we've definitely seen a global shift with leading companies in a variety of industries in Japan, Australia, Singapore, and South Korea and India adopting the zero trust approach to strengthen their cybersecurity posture. But to start off, I do want to just check in. What exactly are the key principles of zero trust? Now, Neil, do you want to kick us off with this one?
Sure, and thank you very much, Barbara. So the basics are that you should never trust, always verify. So very strict controls essentially on who is allowed to access what. The principle of least privileged access. So the very minimum level of privilege required to get the task done. And then finally, assume breach. As you said earlier in your establishing comments there, it's the theory of if not when. And I think from a lot of companies' perspectives, that's probably the driving impetus behind this. If you always plan and design on the basis that the threat actor is going to get in, then everything else follows. And you design on the basis of what needs to be true for that not to be a disaster.
Wonderful. Now, a big question is, why has zero trust become the default security model in today's cybersecurity landscape? Maybe, Sid, I can hear from you on this one.
Yes, absolutely, Barbara. I think Neil brought up some good points. And why it's become the default security model is because boards of directors want to understand what are the design principles that the security team is putting in place in order to protect the organization. What is a design principle that's equally relevant to the technical domain as well as to the business domain? And zero trust is actually something that is based on first principles. It's easy to explain to a business audience and to a board of directors, for example. But if done right, that vision can also be translated into a actual technical solution and architecture that fulfills that vision. So it's beautiful in its simplicity, I guess, but the devil lies in the details. And organizations are able to leverage zero trust to really slip into some of their key business initiatives. Like, for example, if a bank wants to expand into new regions, they want to open hundreds of new branches in 12 to 18 months, they would prefer to have a zero trust architecture blueprint that underpins that geographical expansion, so that when the time comes and those branches get rolled out and onboarded fairly quickly, all of them are enabled with that architecture. And we can talk about the specifics along the conversation, but I think it's just something that's simple, easy to explain to all types of audiences, but also um, the ability to translate that into a real technical solution, which is important.
Absolutely. And we'll definitely touch on more of that as we go along today. Now, Lee, I'd love to hear about your point of view in terms of the education sector on zero trust. Might just need a quick unmute from Lee. Lee, if I can just jump in with you there. We seem to be having a little bit of an audio issue. Just double check that you're unmuted. If not, we might need to reconnect. Still short on the audio on Lee's side.
Okay, can everyone hear me?
Oh, there we go. We're back.
All right, thank you. Computer tries to choose the default for me. You talk about default methods, default headphones. Okay, yes, I agree with Sid and Neil, 100%. From our point of view, in education, 100,000 users, 163 sites. We span all across Western Australia, basically half the country. Our schools are some of the most remote schools in the country. So how do you protect those students and their staff? You know, we're talking under 18 for 75,000 of our population. Now, working with that, you know, there is no network perimeter. We've moved where students are taking home and they're expected to be able to access resources and learn. So really, it's, you know, you got to start at identity. How do we protect that identity as perimeter and scale out from there? It's we'll talk about it as we go deeper into today, but it really is a focus on the zero trust principles are the only way we can protect such a large and diverse organization and set of people, and do it in a way that is actually effective. If we just basically go on a network, we've already lost.
Exactly. And I think adding on to everything that you guys have mentioned so far when it comes to zero trust, the proof is in the pudding. I mean, we've got a good 53% of C-level executives knowing that the zero trust strategy is extremely important. However, so many organizations today continue to operate on legacy infrastructures. Sid, what exactly or why are legacy systems not built for zero trust and modern cyber attacks? You know, we want to know about what are the first few steps that organizations can take to make that shift to a zero trust approach?
I think applications being the lifeblood of the digital economy is clear to everyone, right? So applications is where business gets done. Applications is where you engage new partners, or APIs are where you connect to new ecosystems or you generate revenue, or all of these different business objectives. But legacy approaches to networking, and that are actually still prevalent in many organizations, because not all participants in the cybersecurity industry have adopted what I'm about to tell you. Legacy systems are blind to the application. So they just look at ports and protocols, which is to say, I mean, it's a slightly technical conversation, but which is to a lower layer of the networking stack, which actually tells you that some traffic is going from one device to another, but it doesn't tell you what that traffic is, what kind of application it is, what kind of API it is. Like, for example, if there's traffic going to LinkedIn, for example, on your web browsers, within that, are files being uploaded or are files being downloaded? So you might want to say, for example, allow access to LinkedIn, but you might want to disallow uploads into LinkedIn, right? This type of granular understanding of the application automatically by default is super important. But legacy infrastructures or legacy networking approaches don't have that. So the first step really is, do you understand what kind of application traffic is going through, and can you then leverage other elements of policy enforcement like users and data and their devices to be able to control, based on a business requirement, what types of security policies for zero trust or behavior-based detections or preventions you want to put in place. So I think that's super important. I mean, there's a lot of different considerations, but that's the number one that I'll pick on the legacy infrastructure piece. And if I were to think about what can organizations do to get started, I think it's about addressing complexity first and foremost, because typically we see organizations are deploying anywhere between 50 to 75 different security products in their environment. Now, each of these products has a different policy enforcement engine. It has a different type of malware inspection. It has different ways of looking at identity. So that complexity actually prevents organizations from having a unified view to say, I don't care where the user is, whether they're in the office or at an airport or at a conference. I don't care what type of application they're accessing, whether it's a private application, it's an internet-facing application, or a SaaS application. I don't care what type of data they're sending in and out. I want to be able to apply my zero trust policies consistently, irrespective. For that, you need to be able to simplify the environment through what we call platformization. That has been proven to be very successful, which brings together previously disparate security controls, and then amplify the security coverage by being able to be agnostic to user device location and apply the policy consistently. So yeah, I think there's a lot of fundamental things that need to happen before the zero trust policies can actually be effectively implemented.
Amazing. Thank you for that. Now, change is difficult. I think we've all grown up in a world where we understand that change is hard, especially with the technological advancement and infrastructure that we have going on in the world at the moment. Neil, I'd love to get your opinion on what kind of perceived barriers to entry there are when it comes to implementing zero trust.
Sure, and I think, to steal a quote from one of my countrymen, perfection is the enemy of progress here. A lot of the time people consider just the scale of the task ahead of them, and it becomes incredibly intimidating. And the thing that I would always say is that this is probably going to be a journey without a destination, almost. You will always be doing things to advance the principles of zero trust, but that means you need to start now. Right? And you need to start with the basics. Both Lee and Sid have talked about identity being the kind of the driver of almost everything here, and that's absolutely true. But that's within the framework of basic steps that one can take throughout the network to ensure that if an identity is compromised, which is often where, for example, a ransomware actor will make their initial bid to get into a company, then that doesn't lead to disaster, right? So understanding what steps you can take just at a basic level and taking them whilst also, and again, this is a really good point that Sid made, I think, being able to take the rest of the organization with you, right? You need to get buy-in up and down the organization, because otherwise you'll meet someone who blocks your project, or you won't get the information you need, or the steps that you're taking won't be understood. And all of those are going to be a real problem. So communicating the why, communicating the kind of the what, and then getting everybody to agree that this is a good idea is super useful. Now, thankfully, we have almost daily reports. At the moment, I'm from the UK, you may be able to tell by the accent. We have Marks and Spencers and Co-op Group who are fighting scattered spider attacks with varying degrees of success. that is kind of useful from a security justification perspective, because you can point to externalities like this and say, look, we want to make the following changes to, say, access control and so forth, because if we don't, we are leaving ourselves vulnerable to a very similar type of attack that we can see right now as being very effective.
Wonderful. Thank you for that. Big insights. And it isn't easy, but you really have to rally together and make certain things happen. But of course, taking into account that only 5% of businesses have dedicated cybersecurity experts on staff, and only 14% of organizations are confident that they possess the necessary skills to meet their cybersecurity objectives, implementing zero trust can be a tall order for many organizations. Lee, do you have any advice on pitfalls to avoid in zero trust implementation?
Yeah, I've got lots of pitfalls. So I think Neil covered it well with his quote. I'm going to start with the same essence, but a different quote. So I have young children, so I've watched Frozen 2 100 times. And in that, Anna has a quote about just doing the next right thing. You don't always have to know the answer. You don't always have to know the big picture. You just need to do the next right thing. And I think that's really what came out of our biggest pitfall of trying to do a big bang approach. Trying to get in and say, we're doing a zero trust project and everything's going to change and we're going to do everything at once. And this is how we're going to push it. It doesn't really work, especially from my angle where, I talk about 163 schools. It's only in the last 6 years that we've actually centralized identity, centralized a lot of things. Before that, they were all reasonably independent and running their way. So the misunderstanding of how diverse your IT infrastructure can be, I'm talking from my angle, but I'm sure many businesses out there, once you go down to a local or remote office, it's probably a little bit different to what you really expected or what your diagrams that were created 10 years ago really tell you what the network or what the system is actually like. So for me, really, if you're trying to do it as a big bang approach, you're not really you're going to struggle, unless it's a brand new organization and you're starting from scratch. Why I'm saying do the next right thing is that's how we took it. That's how we angled to be able to tackle little bits. And it was actually me overseeing multiple different teams in the area. So network teams, systems and engineering team, the device management team. And by everyone doing a little bit, that's how we were able to proceed. And all of a sudden, you've accidentally built zero trust. One of the other things I think is really important is the user experience. So we're talking about all these technical controls and we're talking about how to make it happen. If it's not good for the end user, if the end user isn't being able to use whatever you've put in a seamless way, it's not going to be effective. They're going to go back to shadow IT. They're going to fall down to, hey, how do we try to exfiltrate this data and do it a different way? Not because they're bad people, but just because you've put blockers in rather than enabling them to do their work in a secure way. So for me, they're the two real big pitfalls that I've seen. So take your time, make sure you bring your users along, and ensure that training and communication is really there.
Wonderful advice, which I'm sure many of our viewers today will be able to take on board. Now, Sid, I'd love to know if you've seen any trends with the real-world adoption of zero trust that can work across industries.
Absolutely, and I want to share a story or an example of one of our customers. This customer is from one of the B2C manufacturing industries. So they actually have a very large number of Gen Zs working in their organization, which might resonate with the university experience. A lot of younger people that are used to leveraging their own personal devices and having the flexibility and so on. So I was talking to the CIO of this organization, and she basically said, I have a vision to design the secure workspace of the future where all my employees have the same experience using technology when they come into work that they do on their personal devices. I don't want to distinguish or restrict them just because they're using a work device or laptop, and I want to give them really good user experience, like what Lee was saying. So we have something called Prisma Access Browser, which is basically a concept called Enterprise Browser. You can go look it up for the details. Essentially, what it does is it treats the browser as a security enforcement mechanism for zero trust. So now you can actually have the same level of security and access and user experience on any device, whether it's a corporate device or your personal device or your personal iPad. And we've implemented that at Palo Alto Networks as well. I know colleagues of mine who are using 4 devices, of which 3 are personal devices. And because we are completely web-based, the browser is where the security enforcement happens. So essentially, what this organization was able to do was they were able to go to their employees and say, you can bring your own iPads and your own MacBooks and your own laptops to work, install this browser. Whatever happens in this browser stays in the browser. You can't copy paste stuff in and out. Even if you download something in the browser, it's encrypted, so the device cannot, you can't access it from other applications in the device. We can do a device posture check to make sure you have antivirus installed. So it's highly secure, and they deployed it, and that was really important for them, because now they were able to do so much of granular zero trust policy enforcement, because the browser is the next frontier of security, right? And they were able to do stuff like allowing employees to access ChatGPT, but while they're actually typing into the ChatGPT box, if they're typing something sensitive, it gets blocked in real time, right? If they try to print something from the browser tab, it gets blocked, because the zero trust policy is now being taken to the browser of a personal device that the employee is bringing into work. So it's really game changing. And we are having a number of conversations with universities as well for this type of capability, right? So it's really about how can zero trust help you design the workspace of the future and ensure that the productivity and user experience of the employees is not only maintained, but it's actually transformed.
That's wonderful. I mean, that ties into what was mentioned earlier about the end user experience. You want to make sure it's seamless for everyone and enhances it. Now, Lee and Neil, love to chat with you about this one. How can partnering with external cybersecurity specialists help organizations achieve their cybersecurity objectives? What's the benefit here?
Who shall go first? Lee, would you like to lead?
Oh, yeah. No, I'll take the first shot. I can always circle back. So, look, we're education. So Catholic education in West Australia is K to 12. When you look at the space of how many people we look after, there's 100,000 users. Our security team is, outside of myself, only 3 other people. We're not a huge team, and it's a lot of ground to cover. Without getting partners in, we wouldn't be able to achieve what we achieve. So, we use partners that are effective and will fill gaps. So whether it is a level 1 SOC to be able to respond to 24/7 alerts that come through, great. Whether it's Veeam themselves for our Office 365 backup and recovery, our data resilience in that way. Well, now we know that, hey, if there's a ransomware attack, we're protected in that area that covers that. Our main source of data. What we really see is where that specialized knowledge and skills really help us in really specialized areas, so that we can leverage, hey, we have the idea, this is where we want to go, we want to do the thinking, but we need that help in that implementation. And sometimes you even need the help in, hey, this is our idea, but how does this thought go into a tangible action item of work? I'll look at how we've changed to look at security from a data-centric security point of view now. Yes, we know identity. Yes, we've secured it this way, but it's specific. We need to know what data is where and how sensitive it is to ensure that least privilege, we can actually be effective when we implement that. Now, to do that, we need to partner with people that have lived that experience, who know it better than we do, and we're able to apply that in our context of education. And sometimes that means, it's a little bit crazy, but we want them to understand this is our situation, this is what you can bring, and trying to get to that level. I guess the other thing, so yes, using them to accelerate our implementation, augmenting our in-house team, fantastic. One of the big benefits for me, and what helps us prove to our board and to executive that we're actually moving down the right way, that the zero trust model and all these things that we're doing is correct. is getting them to offer those objective assessments. So then to come in and say, great, this is where you've been, this is where you are, this is the benefit that has been realized. Because we all know in security, if everything's going well, it's very hard to show well as a benefit. It's really easy to show how good you are after something bad has happened. But, we don't want to be in that situation. So getting experts to come in helps strengthen that reporting by, you're not just making up a metric. It's not a dashboard that you've created that now it used to be orange and now is green. It's an external third party coming in to be able to say, hey, I've worked through this. We do this for a living, and this is why you're better off. For us, I think that's a good start. So Neil, I'll hand over.
Yeah, so you've made so many good points there. It's actually very difficult to kind of respond to them all within the time we've got available, but I'm just going to pick a few. So I think that the key thing that you're highlighting there is expertise, and you're an expert in what you do. So, for example, Palo have got Unit 42, we've got Coveware. We're responding to around about 1,000 live ransomware incidents every year. Now, we have digital forensics and expertise that dig into end-to-end detail on how those occurred. What we can then do is bring that information back to our customers who hopefully have never had a ransomware attack and therefore would have very few ideas other than what is generically available on what exactly happens. And then use that detail to walk them through, okay, this is good, this needs work, this is a vulnerability right now, this is great, and on and on and on, right? And that combines very neatly with the zero trust principles in terms of hardening an organization and giving it the ability to effectively survive with that whole assume breach mentality, right? We can say in that 1,000 or so cases that we worked in the past 12 months, if the following things had been true, then the customer would have been able to restore, recover, go about their business. And that is really powerful, right? And being able to bring that to an organization, I think, works very well for the organization's own goals. The other point that I would kind of follow up on that Lee made there is sometimes we can be really helpful. Right, Lee may know exactly the right things to do, but buttressing that with our reporting and our data and analysis can have the impact that Lee needs when he's making that case to, I don't know how you're governed, forgive me, the board of directors, I'm going to say, for the school or whatever it might be. But securing permission to do what needs to be done is really often enhanced by being able to base that upon the information that we can bring back as to why what you want to do is going to have the outcomes that you are forecasting for it.
Absolutely. And I think I'd mentioned earlier that with only 5% of businesses having dedicated cybersecurity experts on staff, it does make it tricky. The weight that falls on them as the internal staff to be able to prove their point that this is something that is needed for the security of the company, having the experts being able to really amplify that and prove their case, essentially, will generate a much better rollout. So as we move on, apart from working with a trusted partner on your zero journey, there is, of course, the topic of AI, which has really boomed into not just a specific use, but the whole world started using it for multiple things. AI is another component that can be considered with global spending on AI expected to surpass 300 billion in the next 3 years, particularly with enhancing cybersecurity. How does AI and zero trust come together? Maybe Sid, you can touch on this one first.
Absolutely. I think AI is what can bring zero trust to life and really help implement those policies in a way that's actually achieving the objective of protecting the organization. Remember, zero trust is not just academic principle, right? What we're trying to do is prevent attackers from achieving their goals. And I want to give you an example. Our Unit 42 research organization recently profiled a ransomware group called Black Basta. And one of their attacks, in the space of 14 hours, they were able to get a administrator to click on a suspicious link through phishing. And in 14 hours, they were able to exfiltrate 10 terabytes of data, encrypt 10,000 endpoints, and cause a lot of significant amount of damage in the organization. Now, this was without the use of AI. Um, we did some analysis and said if they had actually used AI, it would have been 4.5 hours. Now, 14 hours or 4.5 hours is a very short amount of time, right? 14 hours is the time that you leave work, go home, sleep, and come back to office, and a few things in between, and it's game over. So if you are to actually protect your organization there, you need a brain in your security operations center or whatever security monitoring capability you have to be able to piece together things from different parts of the environment, like identities and your users, devices, privileged access, your cloud environments, your backups, etc. So you need something that's bringing all of that together and giving you a decision to say, hey, something's going wrong, and we have the ability to automatically block it or for you to review it. And we have raised that to the highest level of alert using AI, right? You can't do that manually. So that's where the next generation SOC capabilities, security operations capabilities, come into play. And we actually have a very strong integration with Veeam on this. So it's not about doing it alone. We spoke about partnerships. So I think organizations should look at what's their ecosystem of 5 to 7 providers in this space. One would be a primary cybersecurity platformization provider. Another would be your looking at your backup, recovery, and data. Another for identities. But this whole ecosystem of trusted partners, how does all of that come together and orchestrate to give you an outcome? So I think the SOC, Security Operations Center, is where AI gets applied to bring zero trust to life. And there's a lot of good work that Palo Alto Networks and Veeam have done on this together as well.
And now that you mentioned that, I'll hand it over to Neil. With AI and you guys, how does that work?
So I think it's an incredibly powerful tool, right? You'd be blind to what's happening in the world to deny that one. And I think the value is both in what Sid articulated very well, but also, Lee, I'd be interested in your input on this one after I've kind of made my assertion here. But one of the critical pieces of work that we need to do sort of prior and during the initial zero trust approach, the re-architecture, is we need to know what we're looking at. Like, what is my organization? What's it made up of? It's not just infrastructure that I own, it's infrastructure that I have as a service, it's infrastructure that's provided by partners, suppliers, infrastructure brought in by students, teachers, and so forth in Lee's case. And trying to map that is one hell of a task. And it's where modern systems such as Sid alluded to can really help. Knowing not just that we have data on what's happening, but what it means, right? What's anomalous? What does normal look like? What do I need to look at next? The modern approach to this is to use machine learning, AI, and so forth to bring that back, and so give us the thing that we next focus on. Now, from Lee's perspective, I'm going to hope that makes sense, but let's risk it and ask him to kind of comment upon whether that was in any way accurate.
No idea what you're talking about. No, of course. 100%. You've hit it right on. So, we use that in CIWA already. So we do have supplement our security operations center with AI and machine learning, some that we built. What is interesting is you talk about you need to know your organization. And I'll riff on this for a second. For example, for us at CIWA, when you implement a SOC, there's some default rules that people suggest. Hey, you should run this. So we see this alert, we can disable this user, we can all high five, and we've stopped an attack. It sounds good in theory, but it is really good if it's a very rigid and boxed in organization that you work in. Education's a bit flexible. Children are out there searching a lot of different things. They're at home, they're exploring, they may be on VPNs because they want to watch Netflix from a different region, for example. There's a lot of different things that could lead to innocuous activity being flagged as very suspicious and then going through. So what we had to work with ours, for example, is yes, if you see some anomalies and they come through, and we'd work through, say, yes, this would equal, let's disable their account, or let's reset their password, notify the school. But what do you do when it's year 12s and they're about to sit their final exams before they go off to uni? Those exams are obviously critical for them just to, set up their early start of their lives and get into university courses. How do you make sure that you're not resetting their accounts, resetting their passwords when maybe they forgot to turn their VPN off and they were accessing something? So it's both ways. Trying to lean solely on machine learning and AI for an outcome is probably going to give you a bad user experience because those things are flagged. So what you have to do is do the context of your organization, know what your infrastructure is or your people is or what's unique about yourself to be able to tailor those things to work correctly. And that's something that that really happened. And that's what we had to work through and to ensure that we got the best outcome for our students without compromising security in a way that was outside of our remit. But yeah, I spoke about data-centric security before. Everyone has everything. Everyone is accessing from personal devices. They're coming in. We have a very spread workforce and student body. So knowing that you can start where you know. So protecting that data is one thing, protecting identity is the other. And I think that's what I spoke about before. Just trying to pick off those little parts will end up building everything you need.
Yeah, and
Nice.
just to add, great point there. Just to add, and you brought up a good point, is about every organization is unique. So it's very important for whatever machine learning capabilities or generative AI capabilities are deployed. Today they're primarily a decision assist or decision acceleration mechanism, and they need to be deployed in a way that they learn the accepted behavior patterns of an organization over a period of weeks before the system hits production, so that the capabilities that are inherently possible to learn what good looks like, how different departments within an organization behave. Like, for example, it might be normal for developers to use macros on their laptops, but it's not normal for the marketing team to use it, right? This kind of inbuilt learning has to happen by whatever AI capabilities you're deploying, and that then goes into providing a decision assist mechanism. So it's very much a joint effort between humans and machines to help the organization. So you made a very good point there, Lee. I agree.
Yeah, and I think just to follow up on the follow-up, I think of course, I'm going to agree with Lee because he agreed with me. That's a given. But I think, again, he made a series of excellent points. And every decision you make has to be reflective of what your organization does. If what you do frustrates and prevents the members of that organization from getting stuff done, then you've basically failed. I mean, in the old world, or the world that is beginning to be old, the example would be VPNs, right? And I would imagine that everyone on this call must have experienced in the past, you logged into the VPN to do a certain task, then closed it again because then everything sped up again. And from a security perspective, this is a nightmare. Getting someone who's sort of using two different input streams, one that you can control and see, one that you can't, is very, very difficult to manage. But you're kind of creating the problem yourself by giving them something that's just not a good experience, which they will try to avoid whenever they possibly can do. The other thing, and again, to sort of sit the point here, I think sorry, Lee, forgive me. You need to be designing so that as long as people are doing roughly what they're expected to do, nothing that they do can have an existential impact on the organization. So the year 12s are doing what they do. If they click on something, download something, what have you, you need to have designed the network and your infrastructure so that that cannot be a disaster. Right? So, from the principles of zero trust, that would be microsegmentation, right? So if a student clicks on this, they still and the attacker lands on that machine and then starts to try to pivot into the network, they just can't do it. And that's where this is so powerful. And to Sid's point about Black Basta and the modern approach of threat actors, which is to try to speed run through the organization and achieve, encryption before the defenders can actually sort of find them in the network and catch up. Again, how you deploy your network, how you design it, the architecture and the systems that make it up will define whether or not that can happen, right? If someone can gain access to a box and then sprint through your organization, exfil 10 gig of data, and then encrypt the production environment in an hour and a half, you're not stopping that. That is going to be a bad day at the office. But here and now, before the attack, working with your partners and experts and so on, you can take concrete steps that will stop that from being possible. And that, I think, is the key thing for me for the zero trust kind of principles. It's start with the last one, assume breach, design everything on the understanding it's going to happen. And how can it be true that it's both happened, but it's not a disaster? You can just move on, with what you do, which in these cases is education.
And moving on, or rather touching on that point that you made in terms of moving backwards for the implementation, it kind of helps to navigate things a little bit easier. When it comes to AI, we've heard about, how they can be used and how it can be implemented to kind of enhance the whole system. What AI-related challenges might arise, and can zero trust models help to mitigate that?
Sid, would you like to go first?
While I have you.
Okay. So I think and again, I think this is a Lee point made earlier. We need to treat identity as the new kind of perimeter in a lot of ways. And the way that we see AI enabling threat actors is that, in the old world, I'll use a really kind of corny example. If I am trying to attack someone in a language I don't speak, I can use Google Translate, but it will be clunky, and generally the person receiving the email will be thinking, this doesn't sound like somebody who speaks this language, right? It may sound trivial, but it genuinely is not. The ability to tell ChatGPT, I'm a senior executive speaking to a junior executive in business formal Japanese, saying the following, generate, that has had a huge impact, because the filter or the warning signs that we as human beings used to have that were quite effective, that just said, I'm talking to a machine, right? This is not the person I think it is. They're gone, right? That is completely now in the past. And I don't think we've internalized what that means, because with the overriding kind of target for a lot of threat actors being find someone senior with decent access, compromise them, and then pivot through the network. We need to work out how to better defend against that. And that to me is just one, but a kind of a pretty thorny issue that AI is generating right now.
Yeah, Neil, and now just to add on with an actual another story that is not going to be answered today, but is something that's coming up for the future. So I agree with everything you said, and obviously, we're going to need AI. Let's talk in cowboys terms. You need AI to be a good guy to combat the bad guys, right? We know that. We know the acceleration and the speed that it can help detect and monitor is great. Obviously, we need to detect and monitor AI itself. We talk about some of the future issues, and I know that's what you were talking about. So I have another role that sits on a national level for Catholic education, and in there we're able to speak to. We brought some students in from various schools across the country to talk about what they're what they're seeing and what they think the future holds. And the number one threat to them, they were saying, was deepfake, specifically deepfake. Not that their sensitive information's uploaded, not that anything like that, but specifically deepfake technology is what they worry about the most. That was pretty the number one consensus across most of those students is that's what they worry about. We talk about crafting an email in business Japanese. We also talk about, how many of us, from an education point of view, the principals often speak. They're often recorded speaking at events. That data is out there. So how do, we need to make sure that we are protecting against anomalous activity, like you said. We need to make sure we are using the systems that we have, make sure that in the zero trust principles that if something does happen, it is contained as much as possible, because same ransomware conversation about zero trust next year, and we'd be giving more detailed extended answers to complete things we didn't even talk about today.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for that, gents. Now, as we start to wrap up our session, before we get into the Q&As, I'd love to see if there is any additional advice that you can share with all of the IT professionals who are with us today, who are seeking to implement zero trust security within their organizations. Like, what's the next step?
I suspect
Neil?
most people will think the answer is buy the following products and engage with the XYZ. And I strongly disagree. I think the very first step, and again, you might dismiss this as trivial, but I promise you it's not. Get organizational buy-in from the top to the bottom, right? You need, and Lee mentioned this, it's not one team. It's not one person. It is a collaborative effort with multiple teams across multiple geographies, often multiple organizations, because you'll need potentially your partners and your suppliers to buy into this, and get everyone aligned on the nature of what you're doing, the whys and wherefores, and then everything else kind of flows down from that. If somebody, say the development team know that they now need to fully understand everything that their applications are touching, all the resources they're pulling from, what the network traffic for that looks like, then you've already made a huge kind of step forwards. If you're banging your head against the wall, trying to get the dev team to even acknowledge that what you want to do has a point, then you're going to spin your wheels for a long, long time. So start with that in mind, lay out what you need to do, make sure everyone understands that they have a part to play and that they can go forwards. And I think leaning on the type of anecdotes that Sid's been giving us is extremely powerful here, because explaining what happens if we don't do this, right, is a great way of getting everyone on board. I mentioned earlier, Scattered Spider are currently in the news. They've just pivoted to attacking US retailers. They very famously cost MGM and Caesars Palace hundreds of millions of dollars back in 2023. I'd use that, put it in front of people. This is what happens when the organization has not taken these steps. And finally, make sure also that everyone knows it's not like that. This is a multi-year journey, but if you can guide expectations that this is going to be a process of kind of continuous development, and that there will be significant milestones on the way, that also will help, right? You don't want people saying, "Have we done it yet?" Like, no, that's not what this is, right? I suppose finally on that point, if you can get to a stage where everybody, when they're evaluating a new supplier or an application or a way of working, is using the zero trust principles to inform that decision-making process, that again will be a massive win for the organization, because then everyone is again pulling towards the same goal.
Love it.
Yeah, I can touch on it. Yeah, I'll go first because Sid will steal all the good stuff. Much like Neil said, you can't wait for perfection. So the way that we've done our journey hasn't been yesterday. And it's not even finished. We're still working on our journey. And by doing that, it's been iterative. We've done what we can, and you keep pushing forward. Like, for example, if you haven't started, or you don't think you've started, but you probably have, I would say, obviously everyone should have MFA, but then look at privileged identity, privileged access management, and conditional access. They're pretty easy to do. People won't like it, but technically it's pretty easy to do. And you can actually start stretching that out and start to see, hey, from these, I now have some metrics. So, you do that, you start looking after your devices, put some more endpoint policies on, you'll have those metrics to show progress. You can say, hey, look, these are our incident reductions, we've gone down in security alerts and incidents just because we've stopped those generating. They haven't been able to even generate an alert for us to investigate because we've blocked them at the source. It seems obvious, but those things really do help when you start pushing through and saying, hey, I want to keep doing more, and you may have to ask for funds or not, or you may have to engage another team who has to juggle which priority for which project they can work on. Those metrics help because you're going to get the backing, you're going to get the buy-in, as Neil had pointed out, to help you push those through. My other thing is actually celebrate those quick wins. When you implement something, don't be afraid to show off a little bit. You're not saying, hey, you fixed everything in the world, but you're saying, hey, I've done this, and now you can see this is the benefit, this is the result, this is a step, and we're continuing on that journey. Getting people excited that while it is a marathon, as Neil's alluding to, those checkpoints as you go through are really helpful to keep people excited and to keep this in the mind of, hey, this is what we're doing across. I think, I'll hand it back to Sid for this one.
Thanks, Lee and Neil.
Any advice, Sid?
I think they've both covered off a lot of the great points, right? So not much that I can add except for a couple of things. One is strategic and one is more sort of technical. On the strategic side, I would encourage organizations or people in the IT professionals domain to think about how would you explain your reasons for doing zero trust to a business executive. Like if you were to have 15 minutes with your CIO or even with your CFO, for example, who's non-technical, how would you explain it? We're doing zero trust because dash, right? We want to design the workplace of the future, or we want to enable the business to expand into new regions in a secure way. What is that, right? Not explained in the technical way, explained in business terms. It differs for every organization, but it's really important because then that becomes your sort of guiding principle or your design principle. On the technical side, I would say where to start. Think about it from an attacker's point of view. If you were an attacker and you know your environment, right? So you know how your privileged identities are organized, you know how your networks are organized. If you were the attacker, what would be the path of least resistance that you would follow to get into your organization? And that is where you start, because that's what attackers are going to do. They don't want to burn 0 days and expensive exploits on an organization where there's an easier way to get in. So think about it from an attacker's point of view, and that will point you to which technical controls or domains you want to prioritize.
And I think on that point,
thank you so much.
Sorry, I was just going to agree with Sid at that point. But and there's a question that we've got in the chat: how should my organization prioritize the upgrading of legacy systems when facing limited resources and budget? Blast radius, impact, kind of work back from there, right? If they get into this, how big a problem is that, right? Then work to prioritize from the route that they would get into that. There's a bunch of tooling out there. I quite like Bloodhound just for mapping the attack path through the network. But they get into this user who's innocuous, has very limited access. How many steps before they are in the ESXi environment? And what does that mean to my organization? And it's not going to be good things, right? So again, it's a really good exercise to do anyway, but it can also provide you with great ammunition and a really neat kind of list of priorities, right? If we lose this, we may as well just go home. Okay, let's tackle that first. We lose this one, that's going to be a massive problem, but we can survive. Number 2, and on down that list until you start getting into the small stuff. And again, as Lee said, celebrate that, right? We've now, we believe, sufficiently segmented and defended these elements which would be of existential risk to the organization. And that's a milestone. On to the next piece.
And to back you up there, Neil, I love this question because I spoke about it at Veeam 1. Risk-based prioritization, phased rollout, all the stuff we've already talked about. But I'll give a real-world example of We now have Veeam Data Cloud that secures our 365 data. Sounds great. That's fantastic. Getting there is always interesting because you're always up against, we talk about limited budgets and legacy resources, but you also come against pre-existing ideas where maybe executive believe or were told by a vendor or someone that, you don't need to back up 365. Microsoft has that covered for you. You don't want to fearmonger, but also it's probably not that hard for you to find a real world example of something that could show that, hey, if we lost data for this is what happens to us. Now let's talk about what that risk actually means. Now for us in Caddy Education, one of the biggest retirements, or superannuation we call it, but retirement providers, UniSuper, they were in the news for Google. They were all in Google Cloud. Google deleted their entire tenant. So something that is thought to be impossible to do was actually possible. It was very unlikely, but it happened. Now, they were lucky because they could restore from a backup. But how, as a business, will you restore if that happened to you and you lost all of your email, 365, or Google, or whatever it happened to be? So it's not about fearmongering. It's about showing this really happened. So, I'm not, and sometimes it's not even an attack. It can be an accident. So how do you protect yourself? So really showing them that risk-based and breaking it down to those, what little things can we do to start recovering as you go down, I think is the way forward for, limited budget. And like I said, Caddy Education, we try to, the most money we can use to get teachers and get teachers assistants, that's what we're going to use that for. So we are always trying to do the best with what we can. And so I really feel that question.
So we've talked a lot about the implementation, right? How are we going to convince our bosses, convince the company? How are we going to make the integration happen? How are we going to make the upgrade happen? One of the questions that did come in was, how can we measure what zero trust model implemented is effective? Will any red timing do that?
So,
Sid?
And this is
Neil?
Go ahead.
There's a lot of different answers to this, I think, is the way I'm going to deflect that slightly. But I think you need to pick the metrics that work for the business, right? So it's no use you saying, we've done this and it's amazing, and then the board looks at you and says, and what does that do? Right? So agree with the senior people within the organization, based upon what you have presented about the risk-based framework that you've created that reflects the organization, and then agree a methodology for measuring that. Now, that the devil is in the detail. That can be many, many different things, right? It could be pen testing. It could be different metrics based upon unauthorized network access to various different componentry, application, workload, blah, blah, blah. That doesn't really matter. The critical thing is to get that agreed and then trying to push forwards. We kind of come back to, the most important thing is just to start. You can always adapt what your reporting framework is, and potentially that in of itself is a metric of success, right? This bit is no longer relevant to us because we've moved away from that method of network access, for example, and now we're going to be moving to this metric to consider whether we're successful. The biggest single problem here is that no organization has its twin, right? We're all different. So working out what works for one is obviously really important, but you need to work out what works for you and how you're going to measure that and how you're going to drive it forwards.
Lovely. Now, Sid, I do have a question for you that popped in. Earlier on, you talked about one of the clients that you guys have, and everyone's bringing in their personal devices with the secure browser for the workplace. A question did pop in saying, how is the secure browser for the workplace different from an intranet?
Well, the browser is a browser, and it can be used to securely access any type of application, whether the application is on your intranet, it's a privately developed application sitting either in your data center or in your own cloud environment, in your own public cloud environment, or it's internet hosted websites like just browsing websites on your browser, or accessing a corporate sanctioned SaaS application like, say, a storage application or Salesforce or what have you. So the browser is where the security policy enforcement happens, and it's a secure enclave. Essentially, you can't copy stuff in and out of it. So even if you're if it's your personal device, you can't download or copy or drag and drop stuff out of the browser into the device and vice versa. And there's a lot of granular security policies you can implement based on user identities and what attributes they have and all of that stuff, right? So I don't think the two are compatible. Essentially, the browser essentially allows you to access your internet applications securely from any device, not necessarily a corporate managed device. So it's one of the use cases that it enables.
Wonderful. Thank you for that. We've got a minute left to go, so I'm thinking, you know what, I'll squeeze in one last question to round everything up, and I'm happy for anyone to take this one. But Robert did ask, do you think anytime in the future we can reach 99% secure networks? Just asking if you guys have any good idea to reach there.
Who would like to go first on this one? I think the thing that's important is the aspiration, because we live in a highly dynamic, rapidly evolving situation here, both from our internal networks and also what the threat actors are doing. Holding that 99% secure goal in mind is critical, but what you've done yesterday may not be suitable for today, right? You always have to be keeping up with exactly what is going on, how you're being attacked, how your users are trying to do their work, and making sure that all of your controls are relevant to today, because yesterday may as well be a different world in many ways.
Sid, Lee, do we have anything to add on to that one?
I think Neil's covered it. Yeah, we were saying the same thing. Yeah, it was a great answer.
Yep.
All right, so
All
it
good.
sounds like we're all about done. Well, gentlemen, thank you so much for being the experts on our panel today. It's been an absolute pleasure hearing from all three of you, taking the time out. It's been very informational and educational, much appreciated. I'd also like to give a big thank you to the Veeam team for organizing this third episode. We look forward to the next one as well. My audience, thank you so much for logging on and joining us with this one today. We also have the latest ransomware trend report of 2025 from Veeam. So that will be flashed up on the slides for you to be able to download for some really great insights going forward, especially as we start planning the next year and the advancements with technology and everywhere where the world is going. It's a great idea to try and get ahead of the game. So you can scan the QR code that's up on the screen, or you can just click on the link and it will bring you there as well. That being said, my name is Barbara Latimer. Thank you once again for joining us on episode 3, and we look forward to seeing you again. Have a great day.